In a United States intent on avoiding World War III, you would see masses of people demanding the money be moved from militarism to human and environmental needs. You'd see opposition to militarism across the population, as well as from movements that are directly impacted by militarism and generally pretend they aren't, such as environmentalism, anti-poverty, immigrants' rights, civil liberties, and transparent government movements. You'd see moves to demilitarize, close foreign bases, close domestic bases, divest funding from weapons, convert war industries to peaceful and sustainable industries. You'd see people who appeared on television and were right about upcoming wars allowed to appear on television again, rather than being banished to blogs and the bottom dregs of Facebook algorithms. You'd see lying about wars treated as something other than the top qualification to lie about more wars. You'd see a lot more basic, straightforward reporting on wars, including what's called the humanizing of people. I confess I have never understood what people supposedly are prior to getting humanized, but it seems they're decidedly not humans. Take, for example, a 7-year-old boy in Yemen who tells his mother that he wants to go to school. His name is Shakir, and he speaks with a bit of difficulty caused by funny teeth and a bad habit. But that's not why his mother doesn't want him to go to school. She's afraid of missiles. She teaches Shakir at home. He sits at a little wooden desk next to the dining table, and he pretends to be at school. His mother loves him and finds him adorable and enjoys having him there, although she gets tired, needs a break, and knows that school would be better. But then the buzzing grows louder. Shakir crawls under his desk. He smiles, he tries to think it's funny, but the buzzing gets even louder. It's straight overhead. Shakir starts to cry. His mother gets down on her knees and goes to him. When Shakir is finally able to get some words out, he says, "It's not safer here than at school. It's not safer here than at school, Mommy." The drone passes over. They're still there. They've not been obliterated. The next day, Shakir's mother allows him to board a bus to school. The bus is struck by a US-supplied missile via the Saudi military and US targeting. Shakir's mother buries part of one of his arms, which is found in a tree. Now he's humanized. Now they're all humans. But they're all humans, always. The victims are all always humans. Though if the media won't humanize them, people will deny it to themselves. In a society bent on avoiding war, the humanizing would be relentless. And when it wasn't, protests would demand it. Of course, there is a wide gap between driving hard toward World War III and proceeding to abolish all militaries. Of course, it can only be done by stages. But when the stages are not understood as steps away from apocalypse and in the direction of sanity, they tend not to work very well, even to backfire. War has been so reformed and perfected that people imagine guided missiles killing only and exactly those who really needed killing. We can't survive much more reforming of war. The United States could radically scale back its militarism, destroy all of its nuclear weapons, close all of its foreign bases, and you would see a reverse arms race among other nations as a primary result. The United States could simply stop selling weapons to others and see militarism rolled back significantly. The United States could withdraw from NATO and NATO would vanish. It could stop badgering other nations to buy more weapons and they'd buy fewer weapons. Each step toward a world beyond war would make such a world appear more reasonable to more people. So that's what we're working on at World Beyond War. We're doing education and activism to build a culture of peace and to advance demilitarization around the globe, including through divestment of funding from weapons and through efforts to close bases. We're also working to align more movements and organizations against war by making the connections across divisions, such as by pressuring the conference scheduled for November in Scotland to stop excluding militarism from climate agreements, and working to demilitarize domestic police forces in places like Portland. I'm not sure we shouldn't be also developing alliances with mental health workers, because either war is crazy or I am. And I ask only that you take your time in deciding which it is. Well, I think one of the more likely ways to get to that is from governments other than the US government and people other than the US people finding the courage to stand up for the rule of law and hold the US government to it. And, you know, for a global organization like World Beyond War, we work as a global community of peace activists, and we put some of our focus on other governments around the world, because you can prosecute under universal jurisdiction. You can demand that the International Criminal Court be an international criminal court, not an international criminal court for Africans. You can strengthen the rule of law, but you know the current system is that the Kellogg-Briand Pact is completely ignored. Various regional treaties that forbid war among their members, and there are some that include such members as the United States and Iran, both, are completely ignored. And the United Nations Charter is virtually ignored, and the little loopholes that it has in it for acceptable wars that are defensive or UN authorized are virtually never, you know, those loopholes cover virtually no wars that we've seen in recent decades, but there's always this imaginary sort of notion that somehow US wars must be justified somehow under the UN Charter. And so I think we need education and we need activism. And we need education around the fact that war is illegal. And my God, if you get people prosecuted for some particular atrocities during war and held accountable and it reduces those atrocities, I don't care how you talk about it. You can talk your own made up language for all I care. I'm not going to quibble over the words. I just want to make the point that, you know, talk of war crimes is sort of the extreme that's allowed in US discourse. And it serves to shut out any talk of the fact that war itself is a crime. And this is including through the International Criminal Court, which is now, in theory, though it hasn't done it, set up to prosecute the crime of war, or what it calls the crime of aggression, you know, maintaining this fantasy, at least linguistically, that there is, you know, defensive war and aggressive war, and it's only the aggressive war that we must punish. And so, you know, if you had democracy in the United Nations, if you had every country but two voting for something carrying the day, or you had even a glimmer of outrage over that, the way you do when the minority rules in the US Senate. If we ought to have majority rule in the US Senate, why the hell shouldn't we have majority rule in the United Nations? If you had that, you know, then you would have prosecutions of wars. The trouble is the United Nations, unlike the League of Nations, which the US wouldn't join because it would have been one among equals, the United Nations is set up with an uneven playing field where 5 of the biggest war makers and weapons dealers are more equal than others and get to veto and, you know, prevent without even having to veto anything they want. And so it's not just that the members are nations, the war makers, rather than representatives of people. They are you know, the worst of the nations in terms of ridding the world of the scourge of war, which is what the UN was created to do, supposedly, are given the special power to derail everything. Just, you know, the US, Russia, China, England, France, these are the Joe Manchins and Kristen Sinemas of the United Nations. They can block anything they want, regardless of you know, moral reasoning. A petition that's been going for years, you can find at banweaponizeddrones.org and sign it and promote it. World Beyond War has done webinars and events on this topic. Some friends and allies of ours have recently created a new organization that you can find at bankillerdrones.org, which is starting an effort on the model of the new treaty banning nuclear weapons, or the treaty banning landmines, to create a treaty banning armed drones and surveillance drones as well. And they are putting together, these friends of ours are just putting together a petition. And this is going to be a petition to end all airstrikes on Afghanistan. We're supposedly ending a war that's mostly an air war without committing to ending the air war. And so this means strikes from drones or missiles from the ground or from ships, but not from drones, all airstrikes. I think drones are a very interesting phenomenon for educating people and moving people because once you find out what they actually are, they look a lot more like murder even than a nuclear bomb. Is there a small enough scale for people to comprehend? But the mythology about what drones are is even more off track than the general mythology about war. I mean, people generally imagine war resembling war of 150 years ago with battlefields and fronts and ground forces and uniforms and maybe tanks, but they don't understand war as it is today, as war on villages and cities, and there's no front, there's no battlefield, and drones, it's even worse. People imagine this law enforcement mechanism where somebody has been put on trial and convicted and they're the worst of the worst and they're somehow magically unreachable, yet you can identify exactly where they are. And they are in the act about to momentarily slaughter vastly more people than you're going to kill by blowing them up along with whoever's nearby. And so you just have no choice. It's the only moral option. You must send your surgical strike in to commit capital punishment at a distance against this evil lawbreaker, where the person is unreachable, can't be arrested in the ordinary way and put on trial. Countless cases where we know for a fact that could have been done but wasn't desired. The vast majority of the people killed with these drone strikes are not identified, that nobody knows who they are. So you can't make these pronouncements about how they are the worst of the worst who really needed to be killed. Nobody even claims to know who they are. And if they're not, if they're anything other than an adult male, then you have to give a few sentences to explaining who they were. Otherwise, they are just to be killed. And it's made war even easier, and it's made reckless actions that cause wars even easier, and it's made murder even more normal. Police murders in the U.S. for how much they are still outrageous to us, and capital punishment in the U.S., which now is going to have firing squads in more states, is so outrageous to some of us. But it's things like a foreign policy of supposedly picking people out and murdering them with missiles that normalizes murder in people's minds. It's just horrific for our culture, for the rule of law, for international relations, and for avoiding war.
Having now been involved in the longest war, in our history, there are people who are, young adults who really don't remember a time when we were not at war. And that does something, to our psyche, I think, as a nation, not to mention all of the vets that have been through this horrific system.
I want to just respectfully quibble with the longest war thing, because I think that if Native Americans were really understood as real, honest to God human beings, people would stop saying that. I mean, I know everybody means absolutely 1,000% well when they say it. But I mean, if you read David Vine's latest book, United States of War, there has not been a moment when the United States wasn't at war, and the colonies before it was the United States. and some of the particular wars with particular nations, honest to God nations of honest to God human beings that were the natives of this continent whose land was stolen, went on for decades, went on for 3, 4, 5 times the length of this war on Afghanistan. Now you can stretch out how long the war on Afghanistan has actually been going back to the 70s if you want, but even still is not remotely the longest yet. But it is still as horrific as you can imagine. And even though the U.S. Veterans casualties and those who've suffered are a teeny tiny fraction of the human beings who've suffered in the recent wars, the report just a couple days ago from Costs of War Project at Brown University found that 7,000 U.S. Military members had died in combat and 30,000 from suicide, right? And and female U.S. Military members have suffered, I am absolutely convinced, vastly more injury and trauma and even death from male U.S. military members than from foreign military members. How do we educate a different world? I mean, when we find particular books and courses and films, we put them on our resource pages on the World Beyond War website. There are wonderful children's books, teenagers' books, fiction and nonfiction. Making our schools better, public schools or private schools, is a big project that takes organizing and activism. But there are great organizations with great resources to use to find the courses that should be taught and the books that should be taught. And we try, in the particular area of peace, we try to promote the best of those that we can find, as well as to do endless online courses that people of every age group take part in. When you're talking with an individual, I mean, the important thing is to let them do more of the talking than you. Find out exactly what it is that's troubling them and try to help them through it. I read a terrific book this week called Forget the Alamo, and I wrote a review of it that pretty well, demolishes the myths around what happened at the Alamo. And I got hate emails, but I also got thanks for opening my eyes emails. And I think, if email is a wonderful medium for people to be hateful and imagine they're not really reaching a real human being, but if you can talk with someone, even on Zoom or face-to-face about it, you can ask them and be respectful and say, now, I know I might have something wrong. Tell me what you think happened at the Alamo, and try to correct them bit by bit. And there are also extremes in the analysis of this, right? There are the people who say, oh, well, facts never persuade a human being, only basic emotions, and you should just set aside facts and reason and not bother with that nonsense. And then the opposite extreme. And the truth is actually indisputably in the middle. Facts and reasoning sometimes move some people, and passionate, visceral appeals to emotion sometimes move some people, and we should try both, but I go and I talk to high school classes, college classes, even on Zoom, about abolishing all war, and I ask them at the beginning of the hour, raise your hand if you think war is sometimes justified, and almost every hand, and at the end, and almost no hands or no hands, and I've just provided basic information that anybody could have provided that they never heard before. I think, people can go to worldbeyondwar.org/environment and see what we take to be the most important top facts about military and environment, and then the resources and the secondary facts and the films and the videos and the books. We've tried to make a website that is this sort of a resource. And The fact is that militaries and wars and war preparations are major contributors to all kinds of environmental destruction of land and water and air, including of climate. The US military, famously the top single consumer of petroleum on Earth. And, during wars, a ridiculous amount of the petroleum consumption is used in transporting petroleum fuels to the wars. And it would be laughable if it weren't so destructive. And it's given a pass. It's given an exception in Kyoto, in Paris, in the UN meetings. It's in every agreement. Countries are left free to leave military greenhouse gas emissions out of their reporting on, and they're acting to limit greenhouse gas emissions. So a number of coalitions all over the world and groups all over the world are working on plans to try to push the next big UN climate meeting to end this practice, to include militaries. There's no reason why you shouldn't include militaries in greenhouse gas emissions limitations. So this is a meeting that starts in Glasgow in Scotland on November 1st. There's this incredibly widespread but demonstrably false belief that military spending, for whatever harm it may do, maybe it'll get us all killed, maybe it's slaughtering innocent children, but at least it's a jobs program. At least it creates jobs. And it's very hard to dissuade people that this is bullshit, because their wife works for a contractor and their neighbor works for a subcontractor and their uncle's in the Navy, and they imagine that these are real people with real jobs, as of course they are. But there's no dispute among the economists that if you took those same dollars and spent them on education or green energy or even dirty energy or infrastructure, or even what Joe Biden calls infrastructure, or even never taxed those dollars from working people in the first place, you would have more jobs and better impact on the economy in its same own terms. And so military spending eliminates jobs, as if this jobs program thing could somehow justify it in the mind of anyone other than a sociopath. It isn't true. It's factually false. And it's also worth understanding that the weapons industry and the military industries, enormous as they are not the only thing manufactured in the United States, are not 90% of our economy, and there's nothing left because everything else is made in China. It simply isn't true. There is, in comparison to the weapons industry, there is a lot of other industrial manufacturing still happening, despite all the outsourcing and automating and so forth. And you could do it with a Green New Deal if even the Green New Dealers weren't terrified of peace. You could do a demilitarized Green New Deal that would actually fund a big chunk of the Green New Deal, as well as undoing one of the industries that's worst for the environment, the militarism. Breaking free of why illegally allow the United States to keep nuclear weapons in your country against the vicious opposition of your people, the majority of your people, as 5 countries do. Nations need to step outside of the US empire and stop playing along and stop being part of it. And if you were to see 1 or 2 countries do that in a significant way, it might have a snowball effect. But of course, people who go back to remember where the peace movement was in 2003, 4, 5, and understand that it put a new Congress in Washington, D.C. in 2006, with every exit poll saying the top reason was to end the war on Iraq, and gave the Democrats the majority in both houses. Then they immediately said, we're going to escalate the war on Iraq so we can run against it again in 2008. that was demoralizing for people who were especially paying attention and noticing things. And for people who weren't, those same Democrats who were still telling everybody how to think were telling them to shut down the stupid activism and put all their money and energy into electing a Democrat to the throne in 2008. And of course they did that. And, there was a Nobel Peace Prize and all was sweetness and joy in the world, except that the wars rolled on and the drone murders became a whole new thing, and the military spending and the development of the nukes and the bases in Africa and the shift to Asia and all the hell we're still dealing with rolled forward. And so, my advice then as now was, first and foremost, stop identifying with a political party and start identifying with your principles. And if somebody in any political party does something right, encourage them and cheer the hell for them. But if they do something wrong, oppose it, no matter which team they're on. I mean, there was a couple professors, Michael Heaney was one of them, who put out a book called Party in the Streets that just, you saw them at every peace event for years. They were surveying everybody. How'd you get here? Why are you here? How'd you hear about it? What are you doing next? What do you think? And their analysis, principally the peace movement grew in 02, 03, 04 because people thought the Democratic Party wanted peace, and shriveled away in 2007, 8, 9 because people thought the Democratic Party didn't want peace anymore. Well, if you identify and get your family and friends to identify with peace and let the Democratic Party come to us when it's willing to be for peace, that would be a huge step against, not the only, but the primary, the number one cause of the decline you're thinking about.
Absolutely wonderful evening. Thank you so much, David, for being with us tonight. It's great to hear you speak. It's wonderful to just hear somebody talking sense about war and why its time has come. We need to end it and get on with actually making a world better for all of us. Thank you so much, David, for your time.